good. Okay, we're working. So we are in Bava Kamma, chapter 2, Mishnah 5, and we are continuing with the question of damages caused by other animals. And now what we are going to get into is a discussion of the different damages that might happen depending upon whether the damage was in private property or public property. And there's going to be an argument in this particular Mishnah, which is unusual. Well, it's not unusual that there's an argument, but the points of the argument are going to be spelled out in a little bit more detail. So it's nice to see a little bit of how the give and take, the shaklavataria of the rabbis worked. All right, so as we usually do, we're just going to take turns doing different Mishnayot, reading the English part so that I have somebody to interrupt. So we might as well start on my left. From where it says Mishnah in the middle of the page.
Yeah.
Yep.
1. An ox which causes damage in the private domain of him that is injured. How is this so?
Right. So this, remember, it's Mishnah language. They're not asking how is it possible that an injury happens. They're asking what do we do in a case like this, right? So this is a cow, an ox, a bull, whatever you want, an animal that has caused damage in the private domain of the victim. Right, so we've got, maybe we should do a little bit of a thing here, right? So this is Mr. V's property, right? And Mr. O, that's the guy who owns the ox, his ox, let's do my famous ox drawing, has gone into Mr. V's and he has done damage. So this is not the ox just walking down the street or out in a big open field that doesn't belong to anyone, the countryside. This is the ox in Mr. V's property causing damage to Mr. V's things, right? The ox has caused damage on the victim's property. Good? Good.
If it gored, pushed, bit, lay down, or kicked in the public domain, its owner pays only half damages.
Go ahead and read part 2.
But if in the private domain of him that is injured,
and here comes our debate.
Rabbi Tarfon says he pays full damages. The sages says half damages.
All right. So everybody agrees that if we're in the public domain, right? Just making sure we got this right. Right. That if we're in the public domain, if the ox is over here, that it's only half damages, right? That's what we are in 1. That's the rain coming back again. That's where we are at the end of 1a, right? But part 2 is where we get the debate. And Rabbi Tarfon says that if it's here, that it is 100% of the damages, right? That's Rabbi Tarfon. And then the sages say, no, half damages, right? And that's, we can't abbreviate them. They're the sages, or Chazal, if you like. Okay, so that's the groundwork, which is outside public domain, half damages, because, I can't be 100% responsible for things that are out in the street because it's out in the street. But me coming into your property, Rabbi Tarfon says, hey, you bring your cow onto my property, it damages my stuff, you are 100% responsible for the damages. And the sages say, no, it is only a 50% responsibility. All right, so now Rabbi Tarfon is going to fight back.
Rabbi Tarfon said to them, now, in a case in which the law dealt leniently with regard to damages caused by the foot and tooth in the public domain, in which case he is exempt, and stringently in the private domain of him that is injured to pay full damages, and since they have dealt stringently with damage caused by the horn in the public domain, ought we not deal more stringently with damage caused by the horn in the private domain of him that was injured, so that full damages be imposed?
All right, so here's the logic of Rabbi Tarfon. When we talk about foot and tooth, when we talk about the other means of injury, when we talk about the public domain, we say that that in the public domain, let me just make sure I've got this exactly right, that in the public domain that there is complete exemption. This is why I need new glasses. All right, so in the public domain, it's exempt, but in the private domain, there is 100% damages. If that's the case, then surely something where we are causing a 50% damages in the public domain, then we ought to decide stringently for the private domain. You following the logic? Right? If in one case we are lenient and then strict, in the other case, if we're going to be strict where the first one was lenient, then we should also be strict on the second one, or at least stricter than we were. That's his argument. Right? Yeah, we're making sense?
Yeah.
Okay. But the rabbis disagree, the sages.
They, the sages, said to him, "It is enough if the inferred law is as strict as that from which it is inferred. If, for damages caused by the horn in the public domain, half damages are imposed, so also for like damages in the private domain of him that was injured, half damages are imposed."
All right, so that phrase, "it is enough if the inferred law is as strict as that from which it is inferred," is a technical concept in rabbinic thinking, which basically means the following. If I'm making my inferred decision, if I'm deciding my law because I'm saying, well, this is at least the same as this other law, and therefore it can be applied here, when I make that statement, I can't exceed that from which I inferred it from. Right? That's why I sort of added in that phrase, it's at least as bad, as stringent, as important, as severe, da 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 da. So what they're saying is, okay, fine. You want to say that the law should go that if it is stricter in the public domain, it should also be strict in the private domain. Okay, but it's only 50% strict in the public domain. Therefore, the maximum, even if we're inferring from weak to strong, from lenient to strict, the maximum we can only go up to is what we started with. We can't go beyond that. And therefore, we are saying that it should be 50% in the private domain as well. Does that logic make sense? And this is an important principle, that if you are inferring a point of law from another case, from another condition, you might be tempted to imagine, in this case, it's even more strict, it's even more important, it's even more severe, therefore the penalty should be greater than that from which I am inferring it. But if you're only making an inference, who gave you the authority to increase the penalty? Right? Why do you get to double the amount of penalty? Just because you think it's worth more? Just because you think it's a worse case? No, you can definitely say it's at least as bad because it is obviously a more severe setting, but to increase the penalty would be to be taking matters into your own hand. And when you increase the penalty, you are taking money away from the person, and therefore you have to have justification. And you don't have any more justification, then the most you can take from this inference is what you started with, which is the 50%. I know you want full damages because your stuff got broken by this cow. But without the authority to do full damages, if you're just doing it based off this inference, then you're stuck at the 50%. Say the sages. Rabbi Tarfon is going to rebut. Number 4, yes.
He said to them, "I shall not derive the law in one case of damage caused by the horn from the law in another case of damage caused by the horn. Rather, I will derive the law of damage caused by the horn from the law of damage caused by the foot."
Right. So this is him trying to get around. The rabbis are saying, oh, so you want to do an inference from public to private? Well, public is 50% and private, therefore, maxes out at 50%. And he's saying, no, 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 no. I'm not doing it from horn to horn, 50% to 50%. I want to do it from foot to horn. And let me explain how that works. So he continues.
Now, in a case in which the law dealt leniently with regards to damages caused by the foot or tooth in the public domain,
Which, remember, were exempted.
They have dealt strictly with damage caused by the horn.
Which is 50%.
Ought we not deal more stringently with damage caused by the horn in the private domain?
Right. So if we're going from comparatively 0 to 50 between foot and horn, then certainly when we go from public to private with the horn, there should be a comparable increase. And again, the rabbis are going to respond.
They, the sages, said to him, "It is enough if the inferred law is as strict as that from which it is inferred. If for damages caused by the horn in the public domain, half damages are imposed, so also for like damages from the private domain of him that was injured, half damages are imposed.
They're saying, look, you still can't get past this basic thing, which is we only have the ruling of 50% in the public domain. So you can't increase it beyond that. Even if you feel justified, even if you feel that it should be stricter, even if you think, obviously, this is something that is worthy of a greater penalty, your inference only caps at what you are drawing the inference from. And that's where we leave it. What do we think? Make sense? Not too confusing, right? If you're interested in reviewing this more, if you look on the back, there's a little chart that tries to spell it out between the horn, the foot and tooth, the public and the private, and so on, and tries to explain it in more detail. But hopefully, that explanation was clear enough. All right, so should we move on to Mishnah 6? Berach, are you up for reading?
Yeah.
Of course, you get the short one. This is the one about human beings. Chapter 2, Mishnah 6.
Oh, I got it. Human beings are always an attested danger.
Right, human beings are always mu'ad. Right, remember we talked before about this idea of mu'ad as something that is there is evidence to believe that this is prone to danger, and therefore you have been warned about the dangerous cow, which means when the cow gets out, you have more liability. But what this is saying is that human beings, we are already, from birth, we are warned. We are attested as being a problem, and therefore when we cause problems, we are following a stricter standard.
Whether the damage is caused inadvertently or deliberately, whether the person who caused the damage is awake or asleep. If a man blinked his fellow...
Blinded,
his fellow's eye, or broke his utensils, he must pay full damages.
All right, so unlike with the cows or the such of, oh, well, it happened, we've never seen it happen before, and there would be a half damage kind of thing, and maybe even exempt depending upon public, private. Right, if I walk over to you and I punch you, it doesn't matter that that's the first time I've ever punched a person, right? It doesn't matter that nobody ever said, oh, you got to watch out for him, he's a puncher. It's from the first time I do it, I am 100% responsible. And if I do something accidentally, right? I'm walking down the street and I'm waving my arms through the air and I smack someone in the face, even if I wasn't trying to smack them, because I should know that the effect of my actions will have around me, I am what? I am known for danger, and therefore I should be aware of danger and be taking the proper precautions. The sleep is an interesting thing. It gets more explanation in later law codes, but the idea here being that if you're lying there sleeping and I come in and I'm getting room at the inn and I sleep down next to you, if I hurt you in the night, well, I chose to sleep next to you, and I clearly didn't take the proper precautions to give myself enough room or whatever else was necessary to keep from hitting you while I slept. So even while asleep, I'm responsible for having chosen how I sleep, and therefore responsible for the damages I might cause when I'm asleep. Make sense? All right, then let's move on to chapter 3. Chapter 3, we're going to move from animals to items. Because your property can cause damage too, or you can cause property to other people's damage. Or you can cause damage to other people's property. Now, some of the Mishnayot in this chapter are very short, and so the translation we're using has more than one of them on one page. So don't be surprised when I say, Mishnah 1 and 2 are on the first page. Okay, so Mishnah 1. Back to my left.
If a man left a jug in the public domain and another came and stumbled over it and broke it, he is exempt.
All right, so I'm afraid we're going to be playing the pronoun game a little bit here. We're going to have to figure out always who the he is when we're talking about exemptions or liabilities. So in this first one, the he is the person who stumbled. Right? So normally, if I'm in your house and I break your jug, I'm responsible for breaking your jug. But if you leave your jug in the middle of the street and I trip over it and I break it, I'm not responsible for it. Why? Because you left it in the middle of the street. Right? Now, intentional damage is always a different case, but in this case, where I'm stumbling, I'm not responsible for the damages. You could argue, well, you should have been more careful, blah, blah, blah. No, I am not responsible for it because you left it in a place that I shouldn't have to be careful of avoiding. And so too in part A.
And if he was injured by it, the owner of the jug is liable for his injury.
All right, so let's say I didn't just stumble on the jug. Let's say I stumbled on it, broke it, and fell, and I, broke my arm. The person who left the jug, he is responsible for my broken arm. Again, you could say, well, you should have been more careful walking down the street. Jugs are No. Public domain should be free of jugs. And if you've left the jug there, just because I was looking at my phone and I fell, you're still responsible for it because it's not a kind of hazard that I should have been looking out for. Exactly, that I would have been expecting. So far, so good? Maybe? Okay. Let's keep breaking things. Part 2.
If a man's jug broke in the public domain and another slipped on the water or was hurt by the potsherds,
the broken pieces of pottery,
he is liable.
Right? So again, the he is liable here is the owner of the jug. The guy, I leave my jug there and for whatever reason it breaks and a squirrel jumps on it and the jug breaks and now there's water everywhere and broken bits of pottery and I come walking along and I slip and I fall and I hurt myself, I cut myself, whatever the problem may be, the person who left the jug there, he's responsible for my injuries. Clear? Okay, and part A?
Rabbi Judah says, if he broke the jug with intention, he is liable.
And part B, though?
But if he broke it without intention, he is not liable.
Right, so Rabbi Judah tries to mitigate this a little bit by saying, look, jugs sometimes break. Right? This is back in the day of clay and all of that, and sometimes things would just fail, and are we really going to hold the person responsible for the failure of the jug? And the long and short of it is yes, we are. Rabbi Yehuda tries to argue against it, but the overall opinion is actually, yeah. Because again, what business did your jug have being in the public domain in the first place? Even if we couldn't necessarily expect that the jug would break, we could expect that it was going to be a public nuisance. Make sense? Yes? All right, we're chugging along. So Mishnah 2 on the same page is going to be more or less on the same type of topic. Yerach, would you like to pick up from Mishnah 2?
Mishnah 2. If a man poured out water in the public domain and another was injured thereby, he's liable for his injury.
Right, so you're up in your house and you're doing your bath and you finish your bath, and back in the day you didn't have a plug to let the pipe drain the water. You take your tub and you throw it out the window and the water just splashes along the bottom and someone walks along and whoop, slips on the soapy water. You're responsible, right? What business did you have dumping your water in the public domain? You created a nuisance, you are therefore responsible for the damages to it. And similarly,
Number 2, if a man hit stones or glass in the public domain, or made his fence out of stones, or if his fence fell into the public domain, and others were thereby injured, he is obligated for their injury.
Right, so this may be even more obvious in some respects, right? If you put a dangerous thing out there, glass, thorns, something like that, and someone gets hurt on it, then clearly you're liable. And if your property falls into the public domain and before you clean it up, someone gets hurt, you're responsible. But what about this fence of thorns? Why would you have a fence of thorns?
Protect maybe from animals?
Yeah, protect your property, right? From animals or from people, exactly. And that's allowed, but let me see how well I can do this. If this is your property, right? Pardon my lack of squares, and this, all right, this is the road. If you want to make your fence of thorns like this, what's the problem?
Somebody might get injured.
Right. It's right along the public domain, and passerbys can just brush across the thorns and get hurt. If you want to make your fence of thorns, you have to set it back on your property so that it's not touching the public domain. Right? Because the public domain has to be a safe and shared space for the community. So having it right up on the edge, you've got a problem. You've created a public danger. You may think you're protecting yourself, but you're actually creating more danger for the people walking past. I mean, whether it's ever happened to you, it's certainly happened to me. I'll be walking along, a sidewalk, and there'll be shrubbery, and sometimes the shrubs have little thorns or sharp branches, and they'll catch on your clothes. Right? What are they doing putting it so close to where people are walking?
Yeah, to the road.
Exactly. So that's the case that we're dealing with here. How are we doing? Good? Okay. 3 and 4 are on the next page, and well, we're going to see. It's still basically trying to sum up the topic. I think you've got the long one again, Penelope.
1. If a man put out his chopped straw and stubble into the public domain to make them into fertilizer, and another was injured thereby, he is liable for his injury. And whoever comes first may take possession of them.
Right, so this is similar to something we've discussed before, but what we're talking about here is essentially composting. Right? You take all of your extra straw, the stubble, the leftover bits from your agriculture, you throw it outside, and you're letting it stew and compost and turn into fertilizer for your farm. Well, if you want to do that, you have to realize you've created a danger for other people. Again, you've put it into the public domain. And if someone trips over your pile of compost, you're responsible for it. You can't say they should have been more careful. And likewise, because you've just put it in the public domain, you've basically relinquished ownership of it. And if someone comes by and says, oh, look, free compost, and takes it, they are able to do so. Is that so? But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel gives a good summary.
Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, whoever leaves things that are disruptive in the public domain and these cause damage must make restitution, and whoever comes first may take possession of them.
Right. So the general rule is you're creating something disruptive, then you are responsible for the damage, and the disrupted thing can be removed by the community if they think that this is a problem. And when they remove it, they don't have to give it back to you. Keep your stuff out of the public domain. And then one more example.
If a man turned over a piece of cattle dung in the public domain and another was injured thereby, he is liable for injury.
Right, so you see this piece of dung, you turn it over, and by turning it over, you're basically trying to say, this is mine. I know, you guys aren't farmers, right? But dung is a useful fertilizer. And when the cows walk through the town, some of them are going to be leaving behind little bits of fertilizer. That is up for grabs. So if you go over and you touch it to take possession of it, once you've taken possession of it, if someone gets hurt by it, it's yours, even though you didn't put it there. Right? You're not the cow, you're not the original cow owner. You have now taken ownership of this dung because you plan to use it for your fertilizer. You flip it over and you run off to get your wheelbarrow or something. Someone comes and gets hurt. Well, it was your dung. So now you're responsible for further damages. I know, I can see around the room you guys aren't really interested in grabbing dung, but fertilizer was important, still is, but we use more chemical fertilizer now. But therefore, the idea here is just if you've taken ownership of it. You might want to think of it more like when we discussed lost and found issues. Right? There's something in the street, you want to take ownership of it because it's a lost object that now you're going to take and become yours. As soon as you take ownership of it, you're responsible for any damage it might cause. Okay, Mishnah 4.
Two pot sellers were walking one behind the other, and the first stumbled and fell, and the second fell on the first. The first one is liable for the injury caused to the second.
Okay. All right, so you've got two people walking. Right? That's a little bit, we're going to get even more later, but it's like a little bit of a Three Stooges show. Right? And the first one's walking along carrying his pot, and the second one's walking along behind him carrying the pot. And the first one stumbles, and the second one trips over him. Right? Then the second one is able to say the first one should have been more careful, and therefore the first one is responsible. The one who causes the pileup on the freeway is responsible for the damages. Now, this is a little different, I'm sure, than you would probably think of American road law, right? Most American laws say that the person who hits the back of the car is the one who's responsible, but not in all cases. Right? If you're driving down the freeway at normal speeds and you suddenly slam on your brakes for no apparent reason, and the person behind you was doing just fine at keeping a good distance, and for whatever reason, now that you've done this stupid stop, it's not necessarily going to be that they're responsible for hitting you. And that's going to come into play, how we balance that out in Mishnah 5. And guess whose turn it is to read?
1. This one comes carrying his jar, and another one comes carrying his beam.
All right, so some guy is carrying a large plank of wood, the other guy is carrying the jar. Good.
This one's jar is broken by that one's beam.
All right, you got your beam in my jar. No, you got your jar in my beam. Right? So they bump into each other, or rather the jar and the beam bump into each other, and the jar is broken. Part B.
The owner of the beam is exempt, since this one has the right to walk along, and this one has the right to walk along.
All right, so let's make sure we understand this, and I can maybe use a little bit of my drawing here. All right, so we have Mr. Beam, and we have Mr. Pot. And they hit right there, and the pot is broken. Mr. Beam is not responsible for breaking Mr. Pot because they both were doing what is normal. They were both equally walking. They were both equally responsible for looking where they were going. And the damage just happened because sometimes people are going to bump into each other on the street. And no one had right of way in this scenario. They both just happened to hit each other. Right? Fair? Well, let's see the contrast, and then we'll see what happens different. Okay, so let's try scenario 2.
If the owner of the beam came first, and the owner of the jar came after, and the jar was broken by the beam, the owner of the beam is exempt.
Okay, so in this case, let's imagine they're coming up at an intersection where they couldn't see each other, and they were both just going along. But let's instead put Mr. Pot back here. And as they're walking along, you got Mr. Beam and Mr. Pot, and Mr. Beam, for whatever reason, the pot smashes into the beam, because it just bumps in from behind and breaks. The guy who's carrying the beam is not responsible for that. However,
if the owner of the beam stopped walking suddenly, he is liable.
Right? So in this case, we have normal right-of-way, which says, again, we're not talking about stumbling or falling, but just they're walking along smoothly and the pot smashes in, the owner of the beam is free and exempt. But if the owner of the beam, as they're walking along, suddenly stops and the pot smashes into him because there was no warning, now the owner of the beam is responsible. However,
if the owner of the beam had said stop to the owner of the jar, he is exempt.
If the owner of the beam is walking along and he's going to stop, but just before he stops, he says, stop, and he stops, and the guy with the pot still breaks the pot, the owner of the beam is not responsible. So this would be the equivalent in our case, a modern world, of brake lights. Right? One of the reasons why the car in the back is considered more responsible than the car in the front under almost all circumstances in American traffic law is because there are these things called brake lights. And those brake lights are telling the person behind, stop. And because you've warned them, they are now more responsible than if you hadn't warned them. Make sense?
Makes sense.
If your brake lights are out and the guy hits you from behind,
Then you might.
yeah, guess who's more responsible for the accident then? Right? Because it's the equivalent of not yelling stop. All right, one more alternative.
If the owner of the jar came first and owner of the beam came after, and the jar was broken by the beam, the owner of the beam is liable.
All right, so we were doing first having our traffic flow this way so that the beam was first and the pot was second. Now we're reversing it. And we're going to do the beam coming after the pot. And in this case, if the guy with the beam goes a little too fast and hits the guy with the pot and it breaks, the owner of the beam is responsible. However,
if the owner of the jar stopped walking suddenly, he is exempt.
same scenario, the guy with the jar suddenly goes, oh, wait, where was I going? And stops abruptly. And the guy with the beam, boom, bumps into him behind, smashed jar. The guy who is carrying the pot is responsible for the broken jar. However,
if the owner of the jar had said stop to the owner of the beam, he is liable.
right? But if there was another warning, I'm about to stop, hold up, I need to stop, then now the guy with the beam should have been more careful and not bumped into the guy behind it. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and sort of round out this this concept. So now we're on Mishnah 6 and 7.
Okay. Mishnah 6. Two are walking along in the public domain. The one running and the other one walking. Or both running and they injured one another. Neither is liable.
Right, so just like we said before, with the pot and the beam when they were coming around the corner and nobody really had the right of way, two people in the public domain, they bump into each other, bumps happen. What's being added here is the running. So you might think that running necessarily makes you responsible for the damage that you caused while running, but that's not the case, right? The Mishnah says that whether you're running or he's running or both walking, moving through the public domain is natural. And there's also going to be some accidents from time to time. As long as no one is deliberately running around punching people, we're okay. And just get up, dust yourself off, and each person is responsible for him or herself. Fair? Fair. All right, Mishnah 7.
If a man was splitting wood in the private domain and injured anyone in the public domain, or if he was in the public domain and injured anyone in the private domain, or if he was in the private domain and injured anyone in another private domain, he is liable.
All right, so let's make sure we got all of this. All right, so here's my woodcutter. And I'm here in my private domain, and I'm cutting wood, and the wood hits somebody outside. You know, it goes flying as I cut it. Or let's imagine I'm here in my wood cutting, and my neighbor's yard is back here, and boom, it hits somebody back there. Or let's imagine I'm out here, and boom. No matter what, I'm liable. Right? No matter where I'm cutting, and no matter where the injury takes place, it's always going to be my fault. Why?
Because you need to take precautions not to have the pieces flying all over.
Wood cutting's dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we look at it as being just something that you do in old-time movies, or, you know, what you do on vacation maybe or something. But swinging around an axe with chunks of wood, that's likely to cause injury if you're not being careful. And it doesn't matter whether you're cutting the wood in your backyard and it flies over the fence, or whether you're cutting the wood outside and it flies into someone else's yard. You are responsible to make sure that as you do this kind of dangerous activity, no one is going to be injured by what you're doing. So be careful when you're cutting wood. I know, here in Florida, it's not a problem that we really come up against. All right. I'm actually going to say we should call it there. I know it's a little bit shorter than usual, but Mishnah 8 is very complicated. And also I want to make sure that for the other members of the class who weren't able to be here tonight, they get a little bit of chapter 3 because there's a lot of stuff going on here that's important for later Jewish thought. So yeah, looking at the time and our attendance for tonight, I think we're going to call it there at the end of Mishnah 7. We'll pick up with chapter 3, Mishnah 8 next week, rain or shine. Okay? Okay.